First, my apologies for the session being delayed. But we're going to kick off straight away. And I don't think we could have a better panel to discuss Kashmir and whatever's happened in the last 6 months than the people gathered on the panel today. Just by way of introduction, 6 months have passed since Kashmir's special status ended. We have 3 former chief ministers under detention currently. According to information given by the government in Parliament earlier this month, a total of 437 persons are currently under detention in Jammu and Kashmir. So that's the broad sort of backdrop. We also have an organization called Reporters Without Borders saying that this is the longest e-curfew that has ever been imposed. We also have a situation where for the first time, landlines were suspended in Jammu and Kashmir, which of course have been restored, as we all know. So that's really the backdrop. And I'm going to kick off the discussion by asking Mr. Narayanan, former National Security Advisor, Director of the Intelligence Bureau, who's overseen some of the most ticklish operations that India has sort of lent its weight to in the past few decades. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Narayanan, do you think that what happened on the 5th of August, is it going to help us in Kashmir, or is it going to have a negative impact for us in the long term? What do you think?
Thank you, Amit, for giving me the role of opening batsman on a very sticky wicket. I hope I hope I'll do better.
No bouncers, sir.
No, I hope I'll do better than the Indian team is doing in New Zealand at the moment. No, if you allow me to set the stage, because I think this is a very serious debate. And we are talking about a part of the country, a group of people whom we always thought were part and parcel of India, who I think have been occasionally disenchanted with India. But by and large, I think we saw them as an integral part of a united India. Of course, Ibrahim will probably give us some other thing, but I think I would like to go, if you allow me a little time. My association with Kashmir goes back to 1964. I think it's much longer than most people in this room were born, I suppose. And that was when we had a convulsion across the Kashmir Valley when the Prophet's hair was stolen. And I think at that moment, the people in Delhi thought that we had lost Kashmir. And I think it was one of the great achievements of Indian intelligence that we could not merely recover the Prophet's hair, but get people to acknowledge that this is the Prophet's hair, because otherwise people could claim anything. That was way back in '64. 55 years down the road, I think we faced another set of convulsions. I do hope that we would have a similar happy ending as we had in 1964. But I'm not too sure, for several reasons. One, and I don't know how many people in this room would agree with me, there are many people in the nation who believe that the recent moves are the right course to adopt. That's a dangerous kind of a situation from my point of view. I don't know what the others think. And they feel that this should have been something that we should have tried to do from way back in 1950 or 52 when the thing. So there's a different mindset that is present. This section also believes that the root cause of Jammu and Kashmir's travails has been excessive freedom of choice given to the people of J&K, allowing anti-Indian elements, I put anti-Indian within quotes, to dictate the course of events. I'm saying this because it makes a fundamental difference to the way India is looking at it. India is not united in looking at what happened in Kashmir, quite unlike the situation that existed previously. There are a couple of items of merit which have flown from this. One is there's a mirage that India had followed. I've been part of it, very much a part of it, that economic development and enlarging employment opportunities would reduce levels of violence and ensure peaceful conditions in Jammu and Kashmir. Admittedly, there have been periods when this has happened, when an improvement in economic conditions has coincided with a period of relative peace. However, it would be a mistaken belief that there is an umbilical link between an improvement in economic conditions and a peace dividend. This has been proved wrong from time to time. I'm sure Srinath would be, as Mr. Raghavan would be, in a better position, and also Ibrahim too. Another mirage that we have tried to follow over the years is that building alliances and coalitions, I think we can overcome the fundamental differences in viewpoints. Once again, I think time and time again we've been proved wrong, and I think perhaps the most conspicuous failure of this kind in recent times has been the agenda of alliance between the PDP and the BJP. What I think, I hope the panel will be able to sort of throw, and I'm looking forward to both Srinath and see, a sharp break with policies that we have followed for 70 or it is nearly 70 or 65 years seldom comes within the one and the same lifetime. So I think we should examine in depth whether the kind of muscular policy has any greater merit than the policy and practice of conciliation and reconciliation that we have practiced earlier. So I've put down 3 questions which the panelists may discuss, and I think the audience should react to. The first, would this have been the right course for us to have contemplated immediately after Kashmir's merger with India, rather than make out a special case for Kashmir and provide it with its own set of constitutional safeguards? I'm not putting any value judgment on it, but I'm raising it as an issue. 2, while proponents of this view are convinced that all talk of Kashmiri insaniyat, Jumhuriyat, are highlighted by many previous leaders, and more recently by Mr. Vajpayee and Mr. Manmohan Singh, and all this talk of winning the hearts and minds of the Kashmiri people are merely a charade which should not have been adopted. 3, should all this now be given a decent burial? I say this because even now, as in all cases, like generals in war and those of us who are part of the policy making in Kashmir, still continue to follow or believe in the old tactics and the old lessons. The new CDS is on record. He says that it's a combination of Pakistan's role and India's past mismanagement of the situation that is responsible for the situation in Kashmir. No major effort is being made to see, are there something more fundamental in the issue? I think lost in this translation is the fact that while implementing this policy in April last year, the government of India, that is, had to impose a blanket of secrecy, a total disruption of all communications, especially the internet, send in a whole lot of paramilitary forces to keep the peace, and by and large, create an atmosphere of fear in the valley and perhaps around it. I think this is contraindicative that this is what people wanted or could have helped in the situation. I think it's relevant before I hand over this thing back to you. Do not forget what happened in 2016. I think both Mr. Raghavan and Mr. Wani will explain. I think 2016 marks a very important date in the Kashmir calendar. That was the time when Burhan Wani was killed. Pakistan was not a factor. Clearly, this was the beginning of a new genre of militants who were coming into the valley. From the ashes of that violence arose, I think, a group of people, for want of anything better, we refer to as the unattached militant. And they are, to a large extent, quite quiet at the moment, but I think we should expect an explosion when things change a bit. I think former CM Omar Abdullah made a statement that Burhan's ability to recruit militants from the grave is perhaps one of the most dangerous points in our calendar. Amit, if I might say, I think these are weighty issues. I have some answers, but I'll wait for the kind of thing. I think we should not push this under the carpet. I've been very careful in trying to list out what are the issues that we need to, because I do not want this to be a slanging match of one kind or the other. We need valid explanations. And I think it is imperative that if India is a democracy and hopes to remain one, that some at least of these questions would receive the kind of right answers. I'll leave it at that, and I'd like to give me an opportunity at the very end to say what I want. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Narayanan. I think one of the very important points that Mr. Narayanan makes is that the Kashmir issue didn't begin yesterday. There's a whole history to it. There's a backdrop. There have been all kinds of incidents. And Professor Srinath Raghavan, in your recent Manthan Samvad lecture, you quote P.N. Haksar describing Sheikh Abdullah's dismissal in 1953 as writing to Mrs. Gandhi and saying that was the original sin. So if you quoted that, how do you look at August 5th, 2019 then?
Well, in a sense, it is also an attempt to break away from the old established paradigm, which Mr. Narayanan is saying. And there is a fairly ingrained belief that there needed to be a very clean break. But I think there is one salient difference between what happened in 1953 and what has happened now. Now, let me begin by reiterating that I still think 1953 was the biggest blunder made by Jawaharlal Nehru in dealing with Kashmir, because at one stroke, you managed to do away with the strongest pillar of support you had. Had an attempt, a more concerted attempt been made to, I think, reach out to Sheikh Abdullah, history could have taken a different course, but we can't change what things are. Now, what is the difference between 1953 and what has happened now? There, that move was a move which was made essentially out of short-term political considerations, out of fears of what is going to happen if Sheikh Abdullah continued to espouse the path of autonomy, of freedom, and so on. Whereas what is happening now, as Mr. Narayan also alluded to, is the result of an ideological program which also goes back to the early 1950s. Let us not forget that in the founding charter of the Janasangh, this whole issue of abrogation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir was right there. The Janasangh stalwart leader, Shama Prasad Mukherjee, led the campaign, and unfortunately, tragically, he lost his life during the course of that campaign. So for them, this has been a very long-standing ideological agenda. So in a sense, this has been done not in a moment of political weakness, as the 1953 event was done, but from a consciousness of political strength and of ideological conviction. So I think that difference has to be made. The question for us is, how will the future look back at this point of time? When in 1972, P.N. Haksar writes to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, no less, saying that this was the original sin. We have to understand that by that time, people had learned that that was a grievous mistake. In fact, from about 1966, Mrs. Gandhi had been making many attempts to reach out to Sheikh Abdullah, to try and bring him back to the mainstream of Kashmiri political life, which eventually culminates in the 1975 Accord. But that recognition of a mistake was very important, and it came at the highest level. It's important that he's the principal secretary to the Prime Minister who says this to the Prime Minister. I don't think we are anywhere close to that kind of recognition of what could be the potential problems that lie ahead of us. We are still looking at a situation where I think the government is very confident that they will be able to see through the agenda of what it is that they've set rolling. And I think it's too early really to say whether it's going to work or not. And I think all the questions that Mr. Narayanan has raised are very valid.
Amit, could I just intervene a bit? Yeah, I know Mr. Haksar makes a strong point on this, but please allow me to say that maybe the sinners of this are probably the intelligence agencies themselves. Because in 1953, intelligence agencies had information and intelligence, right or no, I don't think it's, we of course, I'm part and parcel of the establishment, so I believe that information is true about certain motives that Sheikh Abdullah had. Now, that to some extent colored the opinion of leaders of subsequent generations. And since it was Rafi Ahmad Kidwai who was, I think, the principal architect at the time, I like to believe that it was done with a great deal of honest intention in 1953. So later on, when Sheikh Abdullah again was brought back and he had to be removed, it became an issue whether you believe what he is or you believe what he may be. You know, I just wanted to make sure.
I'm going to bring in Professor Wani, who lives and works in Srinagar, and if we can fast forward to the present, tell us how it's been to live and work in Srinagar in the last 6 months.
I'll tell you that, but before that, I thought that the president gave a wonderful speech in the morning, and the focus for me was on truth and democratic conversations. Unfortunately, I think the BJP should listen to the president's speech and see that both of these things are missing today in the valley, or at least in the valley, but also in Jammu and Ladakh. Truth is the larger casualty here. You know, was it conducive to hold the parliamentary elections as well as the panchayat elections, but not the assembly elections? I think we have not asked enough questions. The problem today is it's very difficult for a normal everyday Kashmiri to have any sort of trust in this state, okay? And particularly any mainstream politician who goes and visits the Prime Minister. But I think he should also think that as soon as he meets the Prime Minister, there's a chance that he'll be in jail. So there is no trust left. You know, you create a media spectacle around a terror threat and send thousands of additional troops. I'm sure even the troops did not know what they were there for, okay? But none of these are our concerns. What our concern is that why did this happen in 2019 and not in 2024? When BJP came to power after Pulwama, I think most of us realized that something would happen on this thing. The question now is, what is in store for 2024? How does BJP present the Kashmir formula
But
in
you have to
2024?
answer my question first.
I will.
Yeah.
But related to that, the first possibility, as Sir also stated, relates to a crisis which may come soon. It will be in the form of mass unrest or armed violence or both. And it is advantage BJP. The second relates to the possibility that BJP conceptualizes a space wherein electoral democracy is defined in broader terms and not just confined to the panchayats. The problem there is whatsoever mainstream would be created in Kashmir, I think we'll have to realize that any future local government will have to have BJP or will be led by BJP. And the third, which is an optimistic view I have, that it may even lead to some resumption of a composite dialogue process. And from there on internal and external axis, something positive may come out of it. But all three possibilities seem very bleak in our own experience, the way we have experienced this. You know, and also, giving you an example, because this government likes to refer to biological, to things which sell well. You know, it was as if we were taken to a hospital with a headache and we came out without a kidney, not knowing what had happened. And what is our situation with normalcy? So we are told that you have a fever of 107, next day 100, 6.8, 6.7, 6.5, and then it comes to 98, goes back to 99. The problem is, tell us what the definition of normalcy is. But if this goes on like the way it has been going on, the problem we face in Kashmir is that there may never be normalcy.
Right. So on that note, I'm going to ask you, Professor Raghavan, we've had crises in the past. We had people like George Fernandez or Rajesh Pilot going and reaching out to the Kashmiri people, talking to them. What we've seen of late is some organized tours for Western diplomats, a controversial EU MEP delegation coming. So our own MPs, many of them have been turned back from visiting Jammu and Kashmir. In such a situation, do you believe that any reaching out to the people of Jammu and Kashmir or to the political leaderships is possible at this stage? Or does the government even think it's needed?
Well, if we go by what people associated with the government have been saying ever since this action was taken, and I think we should take them seriously in terms of what they are saying, they really are talking about creating an entirely new political dispensation in Jammu and Kashmir. You know, the Prime Minister himself referred to the three families which benefited, etc. There has been a lot of talk saying that between the NC and the PDP, there is an old, entrenched, corrupt elite in Kashmir, which has prevented the development of the state. And in some ways, doing away with Article 370 and the autonomy of the state, etc., and even reduction to union territory status with the promise of statehood in the future, all of that is contingent on creating a new set of political dispensation and reality in Kashmir. And I think that is really what the government is aiming at.
Do you think that's possible?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's difficult to crystal gaze into the future. But I think if we have the history of the Kashmir problem anything to go by, the answer is a very clear no. And let me just lay it out for you in a couple of minutes. Because there have been successive attempts at creating this kind of, so to speak, new political realities in Kashmir. The first attempt was made very soon after Sheikh Abdullah himself was dismissed, right? You had a government under Mohammad, which was installed, which was there for a while. In 1965, just after Mr. Narayanan spoke about the 1964 incident, something even more spectacular happened in Kashmir, which most people don't realize. The National Conference was wound up and effectively folded into the Indian National Congress. The Congress party opened a subsidiary unit in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which subsumed the National Conference. The National Conference ceased to exist for a few years. And that was when Ghulam Mohammad Sadiq was the chief minister. Subsequently, there was an attempt to bring in Mir Qasim and many others, none of which worked, which is why eventually then Mrs. Gandhi had to fall back on Sheikh Abdullah to come back. But the terms on which Sheikh Abdullah was eventually forced to come back meant that it was very difficult for him to do that. So in a sense, this idea of creating a new political elite which will be much more amenable to us, of which I think the PDP-BJP kind of alliance was just the latest variant in the old
But
model.
wasn't that also an effort to create a new dispensation?
Exactly, but that's what I'm saying. So successively these attempts have failed. And why have these attempts failed? Because unless and until we have leaders who have the ability to carry the people of Jammu and Kashmir with them, no amount of political sort of orchestration is going to work beyond a point. I think that is the fundamental reality that the history of the Kashmir problem tells us. Which is why even for someone like Mrs. Gandhi, after all those years, to go back and get Sheikh Abdullah was important, because you needed someone who could carry the people with them. In the current context, what we have done is that every leader of the so-called mainstream parties who has stood with the Indian Union, contested elections, made sure that the state remains with us, has been delegitimized at one stroke. In fact, if you look at some of the public safety orders which have been invoked against them, the mere fact of their having contested these elections is held against them today, right? Which means that you have delegitimized the most...
I'm going to stop you here just for a second. In fact...
There's just one addition I would like to make. The distinction between BJP and Congress here. Congress always had a section of local elite ready to take over power. In this case, I don't think we have anyone who is ready as of yet.
Yeah.
No, if I could add to what, see, I think right through, if you permit me to say so, at least from the 60s till very recently, there was always some kind of a dialogue going on. See, you need to be able to reach out to some section. You may not reach out to all the sections that you... It's the absence of a dialogue when you do shock and awe tactics on a domestic platform look good on paper. But I think it leaves behind a trail which I think is very difficult to overcome. it's very difficult to, if you have not got people to whom you can reach out to, whether openly or maybe beneath the surface, it's very difficult to even convey what you want to do.
So I was just seeing the PSA order on Omar Abdullah, and there's a quote from it which says, among the other things that he's accused at, the capacity of subject of influencing people for any cause could be gauged from the fact that he was able to convince his electorate to come out and vote in huge numbers, even during peak militancy and poll boycotts. So this is what Omar Abdullah, has been held responsible for. So in that kind of situation, do we really expect that people who live in Kashmir will owe allegiance in the manner we want to the Indian Union?
No, that is precisely my point, which is that, it is all very good and well to say that, listen, we needed a clean break from the past, that we had a political mandate to do it, that, we have a certain plan. That's fine. The question is, how is all of this going to work out in the absence of any kind of political intermediation in the Kashmir context? I mean, how long can you have so many, 3 times the number of Central Armed Police Force deployment in the state, right? How long are you going to sort of operate it through the powers which the central government wields, because now those have been reduced to union territory status, right? I mean, again, it goes back to the point which Professor Wani was making, which is that when will normality return to Kashmir and on what terms? Because it cannot be anybody's brief that we want to see this situation being continued in perpetuity. I don't even think it is practically possible.
Just a second. I observe a problem here also. From the top to the bottom, I think there is a lack of coordination also. For example, the way these dossiers have been written, this is very poor script writing, very poor. This was, when we explained normalcy in Kashmir with the return of a semblance of democratic processes, one of the ways we explained it was through electoral percentages. So this brings me to an important point, which is impulsive experimentation on Kashmir, okay? It would not be a big surprise if, let's say, next year, an accord would be signed with someone there, okay? And after 5 years, that person would be put in jail again. So I think what we need to do is, we need to stop looking at the Sri Lanka template, the China template, the Pakistan template. I think Delhi has been dealing with Kashmir for 70 years now. Where is the template you have? There's no template to go about it. It has been subject to a lot of change, not accommodation, a lot of change.
I think that's an important point you make, but I want to bring in Mr. Narayanan and his diplomatic hat now. We know that there are international dimensions to the Kashmir issue. We've seen a pretty aggressive China take this matter to the Security Council. We've seen an expulsion of our High Commissioner from Pakistan. We saw the suspension of trade, which is quite rare in India-Pakistan, even though we've had differences of opinion and we fought several wars. But how do you see the diplomatic situation for India? Maybe we have an international climate which is favorable with certain strong leaders who have issues, in their own countries. So maybe it's a propitious environment to take such decisions. But how do you see the international fallout from this? And do you think that the government of India has been able to or will be able to contain it?
I think these are dangerous times for us, if I might use that term. There are 2 or 3 strands that are taking place. One is, even in the days when India's GDP was nowhere what it is today, India's role as a democracy was hailed, and therefore, irrespective of our position on Kashmir, which was not often accepted by many countries, the belief that India is a democracy meant a large number of countries accepted what India was trying to do in Kashmir. 2, I think as time went on, people found that what we had managed to achieve in Kashmir was better than what was happening on the other side in POK. And therefore, they had certain things that they could compare with each other. 3, as Pakistan seemed to go down and India's profile seemed to be on the rise, people felt that okay, Kashmir is a problem area, but nevertheless, things are happening. And there have been periods of peace for a long time. Peace in the sense that whatever peace is possible in a disturbed area. What is different now is to, first and foremost, is that if people think that muscular, strong-arm policies will convince the people of Kashmir that things can improve now, I think it's a mistake. Two, the time is I would say, most inappropriate for it. Across the world, I think we are having protests. I mean, the whole business that strong-arm populism can, crush movements, I think is being bad. So people are seeing more and more the weakness of the way that we are trying to do. The MEP people visiting, it was almost like a Lekar novel. We had an intelligence agency providing the agencies and whatnot, etc., etc. The second one with diplomats going, I think, is again a fairly abortive exercise. So we first need to deal with the people in Kashmir to some extent before the diplomatic community will accept what we have to say. And the diplomatic views are also quite fickle in these matters. And they will swing from one end of the spectrum to the other, depending on how you deal with the situation on the ground. I mean, there's a point of view at the moment, like President Trump says, Modi is my friend. A lot of people regard Indian leaders as their friends, and they don't want to go. I mean, excepting Turkey and a couple of other countries. Others are sort of hedging their bets at the moment. But the time, as I said, is not very propitious. We need to be careful. We need to take advantage of the general acceptance of India across the world as a democracy before things turn out. So I think, I don't know whether I've answered what you asked me. My feeling is our time is running out diplomatically. We need to find answers before things turn ugly.
Professor Wani, one of the arguments that the government has given is that because of Article 370 and 35A, development was not possible. The entire area was left underdeveloped. The elites made off all the money, and there is an element of truth in that. Elites have siphoned off, political elites, a lot of money that was meant for the people. But do you...
This is not just for Kashmir, is it?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about... Yeah. Well, you scored a point there, yeah. But to return to my question, is this a valid argument that there was an inability for the government to intervene and develop the state or bring investment? Is this a valid argument?
So, are people ready to invest there right now?
Sorry?
Are people ready to invest right there now?
No, so that's the question I'm asking you. This is the argument, and where do you stand on it?
So also, when you hear a lot of industrialists, the industry making demands, and then some of those demands are met, I haven't come across demands from the industry saying we want land there. I haven't. Also, people in Kashmir, and I think the rest of India also know that it was in development. As Professor Raghavan has mentioned, that this has been an ideological issue with the BJP, one of its foundational ideological issues. But it's not just limited to that. You have to go into history here. There are three dates, 1927, 1931, and 1939. 1927, the permanent resident protections come in for Kashmiris after Kashmiri Pandits launch a movement against the influx of Punjabis into government jobs, which was also connected to the change of language from Persian to Urdu, number one. Number two, 1931, 13th July happens, but there is a massacre. It is considered, Kashmiris considered the Martyrs' Day in their movement against the Maharaja. And after that, a Glancy Commission gets appointed, and this is for the first time, we get some amount of freedom to organize political association and press. Before 1931, unlike rest of British India, Kashmir did not have a press. And 1939, 1932 Muslim Conference also comes into existence. 1939 Muslim Conference changes into National Conference. a larger, more secular platform. And the demand is responsible government. The problem now is the way this business has been conducted, there has been an absolute humiliation of a Kashmiri's sense of political identity across the spectrum. I see an alternate possibility here. For example, 13th July will no longer be a holiday in the state. What would National Conference do on 13th July? Even if it decides to contest elections, what would PDP do? What would People's Conference do? Whatever would ABCD do who decide to form a new party? Will we have the mainstream supporting a Hartal call on that day?
So what about my question? My question to you was that do you buy this theory that development was not possible on account of Article 370 and associated special arrangements for Jammu and Kashmir?
So my only reply is, who is saying that?
No, can I answer that question? For those who would to put their mind back for a few years, during the period 1999 to 2008, there was a period when a great deal of effort was put into trying to develop that. It started under Mr. Vajpayee, it was followed by Mr. Manmohan Singh, but a whole lot of Kashmiri leaders bought out. It was helped by the fact that President Musharraf during that period, bless his soul, was willing to reduce the degree of terror attacks from across the border. Even then, it became very difficult to persuade industrialists to go and invest in Kashmir. The government put in a whole lot of money from time to time, partly because the ecology of Kashmir makes it very difficult for heavy industry to be involved. The costs involved aggravate the situation. And three, the lurking fear that Kashmir would again revert back to periods when things are bad. So those conditions are far more aggravated in today's situation. First and foremost, with Pakistan, the conflict is far more intense. I don't think the leadership in Delhi is now willing to, whatever they may say, the people of Kashmir are willing to accept what they would accept from a Vajpayee or a Manmohan Singh. And three, I think investors would be extremely careful, I'm using my words carefully, to invest in Kashmir. So the answer to your question is, I don't think that you can say what you want. If you say that merely pouring money into Kashmir is the equivalent of industrialization of the state or improving the economy, as I said in the very beginning, these are all mirages that have been attempted in the past. It will be even worse now.
No, I would just add with two comments. One, BJP was in power there. Why don't we have assembly debates on this development? Why is it suddenly important? And number two, what is the primary resource we have is water. Would anyone there be interested in investing $1 billion in making a dam? Because this internal dimension doesn't cover that.
We're taking off from there, Professor Raghavan. One is also the issue of jobs. And what we've seen is that after 35A was withdrawn, there have been many demands from Jammu and from Ladakh. Though Ladakh, of course, is a separate union territory now, but there have been a lot of demands that a special dispensation should be made for Jammu and Ladakh, and perhaps also for the valley, where outsiders or non-locals should not be able to come and garner those jobs. So if the government, and this matter clearly seems to be under the consideration of the government, and if the government does decide to protect local interests, then wouldn't you say this would be a kind of a 35A from the back door?
Back door 35A. I mean, with far less people willing to accept it because they don't know, because 35A was a constitutional provision.
No, I think that's, in a sense, see, you have to understand the demand from Jammu in the context of what Mr. Narayanan said. See, in the valley, the security situation has been so unsure for such a long time now. And we are now talking about an insurgency which has gone on since the late 1980s. There has been high levels of violence. This is not an atmosphere in which, or a context in which any private capital investment is going to happen. It just does not happen, right? So now what the BJP unit of the Jammu and the people of Jammu have realized is that with the protections of 35A having gone, It is actually Jammu district which is now going to be inundated with capital coming from Punjab and Himachal and other places, which are more capital rich. It is their jobs and livelihoods and businesses which are most open to be taken over by outsiders, so to speak. It is actually not the valley which is going to be threatened, because nobody's going to go to the valley. Valley is still very insecure. Yeah? It is easy for our business leaders to say that, listen, it's a great move, we'll promote, but none of them is going to go and invest. Right? I mean,
You've also looked at the issue of Article 370 quite closely. And you've also demonstrated in some of your writings and lectures that actually it was a real shell. And Article 370 was progressively diluted by different governments. And in fact, in the 1990s, President's rule was extended precisely using the route of a presidential order under Article 370 to keep it going till 1996. So in that sense, is this a propaganda gain for the BJP that, we've removed Article 370, though it remains on the statute books, and you've used the word nullified Article 370. So, can you explain to the audience, what this removal actually means and where we stand, and what was the mechanism that was used to bring it into place at the outset?
See, I think it's important to understand why Article 370 still remains on the statute books. Because Article 370 actually quite explicitly states that Article 1 of the Indian Constitution applies to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, Article 1 of the Indian Constitution specifies what the Constitution of the Union is, which means that it is Article 1 applies through 370 to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So any careful constitutional lawyer would have advised the government of India that if you totally take away that article, then effectively, a case could be made that Jammu and Kashmir is no longer part of the Indian Union itself in a constitutional state, because Article 1 ceases to apply directly. So I think they were careful about that particular point, which is why the article stays, but it has been totally done away with. Now, as we are all aware that in the past, it has been significantly diluted, it has been abused and so on. But I still believe that for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, it was still one of the last vestiges of some degree of, promise about what being part of the Indian Union will mean, that they could determine certain things for themselves and so on. And as Ibrahim pointed out, the manner in which it has been done has dealt a very deep blow to the political identity of people. So I think that's the first important thing that we need to understand which has happened. The second thing, which to me, frankly, is as disturbing as the doing away of Article 370, is the way in which first the state was split up, and secondly, it has been reduced to union territory status.
Why do you think that happened, the union territory?
Because there is just no other way that all of this could have been done if union territorization had not happened. Because once you make, once a union territory exists, the central government has many more powers. Mr. Narayanan will tell you that all the kinds of security, police powers are now vested with the central government. In some senses, there was no way that this move could have been done if it had not been reduced to union territory status, because then it would have made it very difficult to do the kinds of things which have been done.
But one could argue that...
No, Amit, the point I think, but we are coming to, I think the panelists are all agree. See, intent. Each and every one of this points to intent. Removal of Article 370. It's true that Article 370 was being gradually eroded, but I think broadly everybody went along with it. Two, there are constitutional processes by which you remove an article from a constitution. You just don't say you just don't nullify it, to use the word. Three, you follow it up, or you precede it by the forces, but first you follow it up by carving out two union territories from a state which has existed. So you come to the point, earlier in the debate this morning, the question of intent. Intent is very fundamental in any governmental policy. What is the intent of a government, far more than the actual act, is very crucial. And I think that it is there that I think the biggest weakness or the lacuna exists as far as India's stand vis-a-vis Kashmir is concerned today.
But Mr. Narayanan, one could also argue that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is there, the Disturbed Areas Act is there. All these acts were available to successive governments. So why reduce it to a union territory? That's the question I was trying to ask.
No, I think the union territory means that the state has really no power at all. You don't realize with all, whatever it might be, when you say Jammu and Kashmir, it is so difficult to get the state government to act very often because the state there's a state constitution, there are so many issues. I myself have sort of turned my head from time to time because you can't get the state to sometimes do what you want. But these are all the checks and balances that you have in a federal state under a federal constitution. And in the constitution, the state is not subordinate to the center. In a union territory, it certainly is subordinate. It's the fundamental difference which you...
Also, I just want to make one point. Has Article 370 ever stopped the central government from doing what it wanted to do? In fact, in certain cases, it may have helped. Suspension of governments, governor's rule, presidential rule. The question now is different. The question is, why this silence in Kashmir? Number one. Number two, who is making these demands for something like Article 371? I think these two will answer some of the things we will engage with in the future.
I think on that note, we are going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to get the mic to Mr. Ram first.
I think I had my hand up first, no other reason. Following from the last bit, states, as Mr. Narayanan said, you can say are sovereign in their own realm. This Dr. Ambedkar made it.
They derive their powers from the constitution, not from the central government.
The parliament is not supreme, the constitution is. And Dr. Ambedkar made it very clear, states are sovereign in their own realm, although there are provisions of the constitution that override, that give the center a preferential treatment, you can say. Let's just note that. What prevents this methodology being used to undermine the statehood of other states, constitutionally speaking? If you can dismiss the state government, put the assembly under animated suspension, the governor acts on behalf of the legislative branch, what prevents the center, I mean, I'm assuming extreme intent, wanting to undo statehood for states. This question is very serious, arising from the Kashmir, the modus. So federalism or...
Do you want me to answer?
Federalism is at risk. And some people have pointed this out, but it's not really come to the fore in the debate.
Yeah, so I think that's a very important point which the Honorable Supreme Court will have to deliberate upon very carefully when they are looking at the constitutional challenge to Article 370 is the manner in which all the safeguards under Article 3 about how new states have to be carved out, etc., are being done. I mean, and we saw it even in the case of Telangana, right? The question is not whether a state legislative assembly gives its agreement. The central government does not need, the central parliament does not need the concurrence of a state legislature, but its voice must be heard. That is what is the key test there. And in the case of Kashmir, the governor's concurrence is being taken to stand in. And this is being done, let's remember, for a state which had additional safeguards under Article 3 for how it should be sort of partitioned, if at all. So I think that's a very important point. I hope the Supreme Court will deliberate on it, because as you're saying, you know, in the future, you can always think of some other government misusing these kinds of precedents. And
Can I see, we already have Article 356 of the Constitution. It has been misused in the past. I think after the Bombay judgment, I think certain safeguards have been introduced. What you say is it's just a matter of disregarding this. And Article 356 can then be employed against states which they say have failed to. Now, for instance, many states have said that they will not have the NPR or various other things. And these are citizenship is, of course, the role of the state, of the center, and not the state. So there are issues that can be made. If you start violating the principles and the tenets of the Constitution, not merely the actual the letter of the Constitution, but the spirit of the Constitution, I think you're opening yourself to a Pandora's box of possible violations of our sanctity. And I think if you're a democracy, and if you've got the finest constitution in the world, if you don't observe it, we have no right to call ourselves a democracy.
The gentleman with the specs there, he's had his hand up for a long time. Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Minhas. I'm a student. So my question is to the entire panel, actually. So you see all of the kind of nationalism and all the kind of ideological motivations for the abrogation of Article 370. Do you think this, coupled with the using of draconian rules to suppress leaders such as the PSA and all of that, and cutting off the internet and all of that, do you think that will lead to extremism from the behalf of Kashmiri people as well, say such as militants on rise and extremism on rise in the valley as well? What do you think that is?
Professor Wani?
I think Wani
I
should
think
answer that
this is
question.
for me. See, I told you what has happened is that there are two ideas people in Kashmir have right now. One is that this is the worst that could happen to you, okay? And from here on, you will only gain something. I think that is the idea which the mainstream space, whenever it would be created, would use. But there's another dimension to it, which is that this opens the floodgates for more problems in Kashmir. You might have seen statements coming from important functionaries in the government. That's why I mentioned the Sri Lanka template, the China template, and the Pakistan template, that we can have camps wherein people's behavior would be corrected, okay? Similarly, the idea that, we need to develop Kashmir in a way which suits our idea of development, which people in Kashmir have not asked for this sort of development. So what would happen in this case? The problem is the silence right now. In Kashmir, every period of silence has led to a larger crisis. If you see from 2008 onwards, all the crises have been linked to an action the government took. And then later on, protests have fizzled out over a period of 3, 4, 5 months. I think the next crisis will be difficult and different.
So time is really up. So we're going to take two
No,
last
can I,
questions.
Yeah, very
from the
well.
gentleman there.
Amit, can I just add a word to this? Sorry for, I think it's very, very important that we don't push ourselves to the position that where Professor Wani has just now. And I don't want to have the last word, but I think, and this is the best possible audience that you can possibly can to put this idea across. I do think that we do need to resume a dialogue with Pakistan. I'm not holding a brief. I'm not holding a brief for Pakistan. I have been known as a hawk against Pakistan, but it's very because I think for the sake of Kashmir, for whatever reason, there is some kind of a prophylactic sort of touch if there is an India-Pakistan dialogue. I'm saying that President Musharraf may be a good, bad, or indifferent person, but I think during the period that he was the president and when he was talking to Indian leaders, Mr. Vajpayee to begin with and Manmohan Singh, I think we had probably one of the longest periods of peace in Kashmir. So I just wanted to say that because after that we may go off, but I thought this was
I'll just make one comment, which is that I think after the abrogation of Article 370 or nullification, whatever you call it, the anxieties in the government related to Kashmir have increased.
Sorry, I couldn't.
The anxieties in the government related to Kashmir have increased. Even the word Kashmir is sometimes, creates a lot of tension. So,
Well, I'm going to have-
I think
I'm
this
go-
is a
yeah.
reverse of what the government may have
I
wanted.
think with time really up, we're going to take the last question from the gentleman there.
Yeah. Good evening to the panel here. Just already moderator has brought this in his discussion. Now upcoming JK Investor Summit somewhat scheduled in April. So how do you look at that summit? Already we had one curtain raiser program last month in Delhi, which come up with some optimistic numbers of investments with Lieutenant Governor organized. So can you share some data on it?
You'll have to ask investors if they're ready to invest. If I am one, I wouldn't.
Well, I think that this is an issue which has been coming up, the Investors Summit. And we've had many dates for it, but I think so far it's not fructified.
I'll just add one comment here. The summit wasn't planned after 370 was removed. The summit was planned by the last government. Let's keep that in mind.
So since, yeah, sir, please, sir, please. No, sir, please, sir, yeah. So I think we'll leave that there, and Mr. Narayanan, the gentleman, can come up to you and talk to
I
him.
don't know, what did he want?
No, yeah. So I think we're going to end it here because I've been hearing many suggestions from our team to stop here. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for the discussion that we had today.